Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Renewables Podcast. Thank you very much for coming back and watching another one of our episodes. Just me and Mark today, and we're very much excited to talk about a really hot topic in my business. But before we announce what all of that is, how are you doing, Mark?
I'm good, thanks, mate. It's another week in paradise of the solar game, isn't it? I think we're all itching for spring, if we're honest. We saw a glimpse of sunshine last week and we're getting way too carried away in T-shirts. But having had an absolute drenching in the prior days before that, I just can't wait. I can't wait for those nice sunny days again.
Yeah, me too. Me and Mike from East Renewables have been up on a roof today, and Dean was equally outside fitting the battery, and me and Mike were on a standing seam zinc roof trying to put panels on there, and it was a 45, I think it was a 45-degree angle, and the scaffolding was set about a metre below the gutter. So I had to fabricate a way of the ladder with the big softy cushions on the ladder to make sure that we could actually work on it. And I was just, Mike had gone to get something. I can't remember what it was, but he'd gone to get something, and I had my coat. My coat was open and the hood was down, and it just started. It wasn't hail, but it was the wind. The wind was blowing this rain so fast that it felt like it was hail. And so I literally zipped my coat up. I had my woolly hat on already, hood up of my hoodie, hood up of my coat, the strap around the hood of the coat, and I was just sat there in almost like a fetal position, kneeling on this cushion. I'm thinking, what am I doing? And I should not be fitting solar at this time of year. But then equally, 2 minutes later, the sun came out to a degree, and the rain/hail stopped, and me and Mike had a good laugh. So, all was forgiven at that point. But yeah, it's a challenge at this time of year. We just had that storm as well come through, which was probably the wind and stuff that you guys had. Luckily, I wasn't in that. We didn't have any outside work during that day, but not through planning, just through luck more than anything. But it's challenging, isn't it? And the topic that we're going to chat about today is an equally challenging topic, but just doesn't get you as damp, really. And that is around the topic of fitting battery storage with a customer's pre-existing feed-in tariff system, but also making amendments to that, and just a wider conversation around the feed-in tariff side of things. We've had conversations around this topic before, but it's still one that's going to be in a lot of our professional lives for still maybe another 10 years or so, something like that. So we're still going to be probably talking about this over the next 10 years, I would have thought, because we're going to be up against it.
Yeah, I mean, all those early adopters want the latest and greatest kit generally, don't they? And they've got the budget to have it. So you've got I see it as two problems. One is making the technology play nice with the existing kit that they've got, and that could be due to the panel type they've had fitted and the inverters that are in place if they're wanting to keep them. And then kind of the legalities of that, and well, not the legalities, but keeping hold of that fit payment, that golden goose that keeps laying that egg. They do not want to lose that, do they?
No, they don't. And the customer that has prompted this podcast they have a feed-in tariff of 70 pence per kilowatt hour.
Awesome.
Unreal. To couple that with, just to make the maths easy, couple that with a 30 pence saving every time they use that energy. You know, if they would normally pay 30 pence for what they buy in, reality it's a bit less, but to make my maths easy, you know, it's £1 benefit every time they generate and use their own power. It's unreal. The feed-in tariff side of things is one of them. I remember writing out towards the middle to end of my career in with this company that I kind of trained with. I remember writing out all of the feed-in tariff application forms and everything, and I'm thinking, and obviously as a Yorkshireman like yourself, you kind of look at it and you go, that sounds like a good thing. What's the catch here? And you're kind of writing out the documentation, and you have to fill in estimated annual generation and all this sort of stuff, which the office used to provide. And I'm thinking in my mind, 43 pence times 4,000 for 25 years as a minimum. I'm thinking, wow, this is something. And myself and my dad actually, when I was staying with him, we actually looked at trying to do this ourselves, set up a company doing it ourselves, which is, you know, odd now that got a solar company but don't have the benefit of the feed-in tariff being around. But it was a real period of boom in terms of companies starting up and trying to take advantage of this thing that seemed too good to be true, but it wasn't. It was just too good. There was no faking it, and I think there's kind of a bit of symmetry there now in terms of people entering the renewables industry now. It's kind of feels like it's a boom period for it now.
Yeah, certainly with the energy costs driving it, and now we're getting these interest-free loans and potentially grants on the horizon as well. I think we're definitely in that era again. And the feed-in tariff, I think it rises with inflation every year, doesn't it? And we've had quite a lot of inflation the last
Yeah.
few years at least. So that's how people end up on these staggering amounts of money for not just what they use, but what they produce. And yeah, very much they don't want that putting at risk by solar installers coming in and swapping panels and inverters. And it can get, well, I certainly thought it was confusing, as we're quite fresh to industry. I might be not as confused by it 'cause you've been in it way longer. But that kind of, what do you even do to be allowed to make a change to a system like that? And what are the different technologies and ways you can approach it? And I guess the way we brought our idea to market was with the AC coupled battery system, because that kind of removed any kind of need to interfere with that existing setup. You could just leave your panels and inverters as they were and tie in a battery elsewhere in the system to capture that exported power, and it's totally separate to that metered generation and stuff. But it's not really the most efficient way of that system as a whole, is it? I think.
No, that's it, and that is exactly the right way to do it to limit any sort of risk of any conflict, because you haven't even got to change the generation meter on that. It's literally, you are treating that as just a completely separate entity. And so for anyone that's fresh into renewables listening to this, it's kind of a case of a customer's already got a solar PV system that's registered with this feed-in tariff side of things, and that's why we still have to fit generation meters. It seems like a crazy hangover that they still haven't managed to get kind of phased out, or there's a bit of ambiguity if they have phased it out or not. So to stay on the right side of it, in my business, we still fit them. And but what the customers effectively got is they've got a solar PV system there, which is generating power for their home to use, but they're also getting paid, like we mentioned, 70 pence, which originally would have been the 40 odd pence tariff. And that's gone up with inflation. And so suddenly they've got this benefit where that meter is effectively just printing the money. And they're obviously very precious about making sure that that doesn't get disrupted. And the different ways that you can, that some customers look to approach it and some installers look to approach it is fit an AC coupled system. So a battery is there, has a supply from your consumer or a gateway, as we see nowadays more and more. And that system then just almost peeks at what the solar's doing. It just has a little look and puts that information onto the app. And for a lot of the systems, they don't even necessarily need to see that solar generation. They just need to see the import and export from the grid. And it's simply there for the customer to basically see what the solar's doing. Because a lot of these, and you'll have seen it, Mark, a lot of these older systems didn't have any monitoring because people weren't bothered. To be honest, the only monitoring was that when they went to submit their next reading on their meter, if it hadn't moved, they were concerned. If it had moved, they weren't really that concerned.
Yeah, I mean, one of our listeners, Steve in Pickworth, is one of our customers as well. We went through that process where he had 3 single-phase old school Aurora PV inverters in really hard to access places on his property. So he had a 3-phase supply, and they put solar on his garage, solar on the main house, and solar on this extension with the 3 separate inverters. And the meters were all in really awkward places as well. And he's getting on a bit. He's having trouble accessing them, getting the readings. He thought one of them had maybe got stuck and the inverter failed, but he'd no real way of knowing because there's no monitoring, no data, no nothing. So he went through the process of wanting to add battery storage because of ground source heat pump he was getting and the consumption that thing was going to have. And as part of the project, he wanted to have sight of his existing kit in the new app and the new kit we were speccing for him, but also to have the meters replaced because he wasn't convinced they were working and moved. And that brought some complexities with the fit owners because you have to seek their permission and make sure they're happy with those changes. And then our side as installers, making sure we don't mess up any of the cabling around all of that causes a problem where it's not been metered in the right way, especially when you're drawing battery storage into the equation. So this was a 3-phase SIG Energy It was two 25 kilowatt inverters. It was a big old system. And we could have put the strings from the existing PV straight into those Sagen stores, but the fit owners didn't grant permission for that, even though, if you remember, get to net metering and stuff later on, they just weren't happy with it. So we had to leave it AC coupled for the big Sagen stores and the separate PV inverters, and they did give permission to change and move the meters to a more accessible place. But that's the challenges with this old stuff we're coming across. It's been set up in a way that wasn't ever really designed to integrate with anything else, was it? It was kind of like, this is just going to sit there 25 years and do its job. But that's not the way the world has gone with this technology.
Yeah, and I think it was sat there, and it was kind of the first real touch point that people had with renewable energy, because EVs, apart from the odd, version 1 Nissan Leaf, there wasn't really any EVs out there. So people didn't really have that. They knew obviously about the whole climate change thing, and they maybe seen these things that look like air conditioning units, but again, heat pumps weren't really that common either. So actually, solar was kind of the real first magic of renewables, where you're generating something not from burning it. You're literally generating it from the sunlight. So that kind of, and we see that in terms of when new people get solar PV, in terms of just getting them, they kind of get that bug, and they see the generation, they see how it's all working, and suddenly they want more solar, more batteries, look at get a heat pump, because it's kind of like that entry into the industry. And that for people that had the money to spend was feed-in tariff solar PV. They had that money to spend on it. And it's not the scheme's fault that there are these kind of restrictions on what you can do, because batteries, it was all really lead acid stuff and all that. There wasn't really that problem wasn't there to be thought about at that point, whereas it is now. And a lot of these companies, energy companies that deal with the day to day of people doing things with feed-in tariff registered systems, they're on a skeleton staff, because there's no new people coming into it. They're just dealing with heritage stuff, and a lot of those feed-in tariff systems will just be ticking away in the background, doing their thing. But for the ones that do want to make a change, or add battery storage, or add more panels, and re-roof, all these different challenges that there are around it, the scheme was never really designed to tackle those head on, because they just simply didn't really know what was going to happen. Really, it was more of a stimulus than an actual thing where they were like, right, we need a 25-year plan for this, even though it's because it's ready, it's going to be mandated that you get that tariff for 25 years. They kind of just, for me, it felt like the 25. I don't really know what the sense was around the 25 years, because a lot back then, a lot of the panels weren't warranted for 25 years. So it's, I don't know where they got that number from, but it seems like a hell of a long time. I bet they're absolutely fuming that they decided to use 25 years.
It's probably to tie it in with like a mortgage duration or something. I don't know. It fits alongside that, doesn't it? Just as a rough guess. But it's a real issue, and we spoke about it with the panels in particular around feed-in tariff ones, where you have a panel fail and you've got to match it in and keep the same rating, or if a consumer wants to change the roof layout and add in more PV alongside it. But when we're looking at the battery side, just for any consumers who aren't really sure the difference between an AC coupled and DC coupled system, the losses on the AC coupled side is the thing that tends to get consumers thinking about it more, especially when they're looking at energy reduction and protecting the grid and decarbonising, rather than just the financial aspect. But you've got your PV generation on the roof that's DC, which comes down to your solar inverter, which will convert it to AC, and that would then run to your AC coupled battery inverter to turn it back to DC and store that in the batteries, and then the converse direction going back to the households, and those transfer from AC to DC, you get losses. And so it's kind of good in a way of satisfying, not interfering with the fit, but it's not the best in terms of the performance of the system. And that's where the hybrid inverters make a lot of sense, because that DC can come straight off the roof, straight into the batteries, and you're maximising your generation, reducing your grid dependence, and it's better at decarbonising the grid, I would say. I mean, it's a negligible amount, but it still all counts, doesn't it? It's all in there, and that is important to some people. So there needs to be a mechanism with the fit for that to work. And there is one, from my understanding. We've not done it in our business, so I've got no real experience of it, but it can be done, can't it?
It can be. And the other benefit there that we're seeing more now with DC coupled systems, is the reduction in the clipping as
Yeah.
well. Being able to charge the battery whilst
Good
also
point.
pushing power through the inverter into the home to either export it or to use it. So there's massive benefits to DC coupling. Now the problem comes with DC coupling of suddenly you've got an inverter rating that is different to the original inverter rating that was signed up for, and the almost like the one shoe that fits all system that went that everyone put on was 16 250 watt panels with a 3.6 kilowatt inverter, it's a normal string inverter or a solar edge or something like that. And that was kind of, if your roof had loads of space, you were still getting a 16 panel system. If your roof didn't have enough space for 16 panels, then somehow they were bodged on. That's how the world kind of saw it. But the problem comes now is that as those inverters get older, customers are kind of looking at it thinking, well, when I get my battery, I might as well, it's got a solar inverter in it. They've maybe watched some of your stuff or my stuff or other people's stuff and gone, well, there's no point me buying another inverter and another battery inverter and sacrifice efficiency by having an AC coupled system. Let's have a DC coupled system. And I want a high discharge rate. So instead of a 3.6 kilowatt inverter on that, I want to get an 8 or a 10 or a 12. The issue there becomes is that the declared net capacity on that original feed-in tariff form was the inverter size, because that is your bottleneck. The 4 kilowatt, you still declared you had 4 kilowatts of panels, but your declared net capacity on your feed-in tariff agreement is 3.6 kilowatts. So to feed that original, let's say you're not making any amendments to the solar PV, which we can talk about in a minute, but let's say you're not making any amendments, you're still delivering that 4 kilowatt peak of energy into an inverter, but you've opened the bottleneck up now.
Yeah.
So that's the first issue you've got. The second issue is the meter inside, because as we know, people getting these battery systems are looking to charge up overnight, store that energy, and then discharge that energy back into their home or their car or their heat pump, or just export it to make the difference between the day and the night rate. The issue with that is if you kept the same generation meter that you had on your original feed-in tariff system, is that generation meter only measures energy in one direction. And that direction is from the inverter to your house. So if you kept that meter and you bought all of that energy in, this meter doesn't see it. So if you bought 10 kilowatt hours of energy in to store in your battery because it was at 7.5 pence, the meter doesn't see it. As soon as you discharge that energy from your inverter, it's had nothing to do with the solar, it's just energy you've purchased cheaply. As soon as that's pushed back through that meter, you are getting the difference between the 7.5p and the 27.5p, so you're making a 20 pence saving, but you're also getting paid your 70 pence of your feed-in tariff because that meter has seen that energy go back in that direction, which would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
That's a proper money printing factory machine, isn't it? Whatever you going to call it.
Yeah, exactly. And if anyone wants that to happen, let me know and I'll do you a Facebook deal. No, I'm joking. But there'll be, but in seriousness, there will be those little schneidy things going on in the background, I'm sure. But the issue we have around that is that then suddenly the feed-in tariff provider requires us to have a net meter. And that net meter does see what is coming in from the grid and then does see what's going back from the battery into the house and basically gives you the difference between the two.
Yeah. I mean, that's the some parts of what you need, isn't it, for the fit, and getting that set up right is really important. And sometimes with net meters, especially for my dyslexic thinking, it's very easy to get that basic thing wrong. We did that on a little demo board actually at a one-to-one training where I'd got the meter in on a net meter incorrect for a demo we were doing. So you wonder if other installers have gone out there and made that mistake and had the embarrassing conversation with the customer at the first meter reading of it not being right.
I've done it.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
I had to send the customer an Amazon voucher for the lost generation because luckily it was over a poor period, but a poor generation period. But the issue that installers have, like I say, we've done it, is that when you fit a normal generation meter, just the sort of single direction one, you wire it in reverse. So your supply is or what seems to be reverse. your supply is your battery, is your solar, and your load is the grid. So you monitor it going in that direction. When you fit a net meter, the inverter is your load, and your grid, or your house connection is your have I got that right? Yeah,
Double checking himself.
No, so the energy that's going to come in, so from the grid is your grid connection, is your mains connection, and your inverter is your load connection. So you wire it the other way around, and that can catch you out, because if you do it the wrong way around, as we did, then suddenly the net figure is always in minus, and they don't accept that. So that's where you've got to be careful with the net metering. So suddenly you've got to change the cabling over, but there's a bigger F up here that has maybe happened by a company that I'm sure I don't know anything about, is that and in all seriousness, this has been a massive learning journey for myself, is that when you do encounter that situation where you do fit a DC coupled battery system, and suddenly to an existing feed-in tariff system, right, let me explain a bit of the backstory of this. And this isn't a defence. This is more of like a backstory of this whole situation. This is probably a good point to put this into the podcast. So a customer approached us, and they had I can't remember the size of the system, but let's just say they had a 4 kilowatt PV system, and they wanted more panels. And I'd released a video on my YouTube about the fact that you can adjust a feed-in tariff register system. You can put more panels on than your rating, and you can. And I've got a letter that I've sent to probably 100 people now after that video of Ofgem confirming that you can. But you drop onto estimated export payments. Now, obviously, these places hate doing that because it's not the norm. Ofgem tell them they have to do it, but it's not the norm. So we always get customers, if they want to do that, to get it in writing from British Gas, Eon Next, wherever it is that they get paid, get it in writing that they're happy to put you on that. And sometimes they just don't play ball, but that's the risk. So we try and de-risk things from ourselves. So this customer in question got that confirmation, and they were happy to do that. I was like, great. So we put them, let's just say double the capacity. I can't remember the numbers. Double the capacity of panels on. We changed the existing 4 kilowatt inverter for a battery system with around a 4 kilowatt inverter on it. So we kept that bit the same, mainly because of the infrastructure out to this area. We couldn't put a bigger inverter on without ripping the whole building apart to put a bigger cable in, and the customer was fine with that. So this battery system obviously had batteries. I think it's 15 kilowatt hours of storage, and more solar generation. Absolutely happy days. The installation went horrendously because the roof was horrendous, but the job got done, and it cost us a lot more money than what we thought. Now, fast forward a couple of months as this system's been ticking away. It's been really poor weather over the winter period, as you'd expect in the UK. But one thing that started to come to light was that the net figure, because we had to change the meter because we had this battery that's DC coupled, the net figure on this meter, some days would go up by a couple of kilowatt hours, some days would actually drop and come down from a position that it was at. So we had it where it would be at, say, 98 kilowatt hours on the net figure, and suddenly it was dropping to 95 the next day, and we're like, it's got to be a meter issue. There's something going on. It's not adding, it's missing some generation on there. Now, it took me about 2 weeks of like headspace and chatting to people, and I phoned the meter manufacturer, and it was them that really kind of gave me the keystone to this, and everything just fell into place after that. And what they've said is that they've had a lot of calls of this, about this, and it is because of the losses over the inverter. Because we've got to remember the net figure is really there to isolate the solar generation. But if you are heavily using that battery and you are buying in 15 kilowatt hours of energy, then exporting that 15 kilowatt hours of energy back into the house, then if you have those losses over the inverter, then that net figure is going to decrease. So if you don't have any generation to offset that loss, then that net figure is going to decrease. So to give you a bit of an example for anyone listening, trying to get all the numbers in their head, let's just imagine your It's the middle of winter, as we're kind of just coming out of, and your solar basically hasn't turned on to any meaningful amount. You've maybe generated 0.2 kilowatt hours. You can basically just disregard it. So effectively, that battery has just been used to buy cheap power and to give that cheap power to the home when energy is needed. But it would cost you a lot more, 3 times more, 2 times more, whatever. You've bought in 10 kilowatt hours of energy. The meter has logged an import, your net generation meter, should I say, not disregard your mains meter, just your net generation meter that's connected to your battery and your solar. That has logged 10 kilowatt hours of purchase going into that inverter. Now, there's no losses because it's taken that reading before it's hit the inverter. That inverter converts that AC into DC, puts it into the batteries, happy days. But there has been maybe a 3% loss over that. So let's say, what's the 3%? Let's say there's like let's just say 9.5, it's less than that, but there's 9.5 kilowatt hours now of stored energy for that 10 kilowatt hours of purchase that you've just done. So that's sat there and that's been discharged throughout the day, and now the battery's empty. But what's happened is you've had 9.5 kilowatt hours, so you've already made a loss of 0.5, and then you've discharged that energy. It's gone through the inverter again. You've made another 0.5 loss. That's just to keep the maths easy. So suddenly the meter has seen 10 kilowatt hours of import go into the battery, but only 9 kilowatt hours going back out of it. So the net is actually -1. So suddenly that feed-in tariff reading, because that's the only way we can do it, has actually reduced by -1. And so that over a period of time, say you have a really bad week and you're doing that every single day, so you've had 7 days of it going down by -1, suddenly you're at -7 position by the end of the week. Let's now say you have a really decent day and it generates 7 kilowatt hours of energy. Suddenly you're at a 0 net position because all you've done by generating that 7 kilowatt hours of energy is you've offset the losses you've made over the inverter. So, and the issue now is that everything's so visible on the app that the customer can see they've generated 7 kilowatt hours, but the meter's showing 0. And it's because it's made up the losses of that conversion process from import to export.
Yeah, I guess if it's in a cold environment as well, the battery and inverter, that loss is only going to be exacerbated when the weather is bad. So if you're in an unheated space, which generally they are, then that's going to become really noticeable. But I think there's an argument with that consumers can't have their cake and eat it all of the time, because equally I imagine they're on a cheap overnight tariff buying all of that energy, and the effect of that will probably more than offset that small difference in the net reading through the feed-in tariff losses, or maybe not at 70p a unit. It's quite a difficult one, isn't it, I suppose? But it's one of those where there will be those times where that does happen. There will be that trade-off with an upgrade, and that is something I would not have thought about, to be fair, as part of one of the problems that's news to me. It makes perfect sense with the losses of inverters. I fully understand how you've explained it there really well, that is what's happening, but it certainly isn't something I would have thought to explain to a customer if we was going down that path. And
neither.
At this time of year, that's when it's going to be really visible, isn't it? If you fit it in spring when the customer's maybe excited about their new kit and they're monitoring it and watching it, never going to notice. Winter comes around, they've forgotten about the tech to a degree, and it just sits there and it does its thing. Probably wouldn't have noticed. It's just been bad timing that you've put it in winter. But yeah, that's a good education piece, I think, for other installers who are watching along with that, because this is going to become a bigger and bigger thing over the next 5 years with all the new technologies coming out and all the grants and funding that's available. Lots of people with fit systems are going to be looking to do stuff like this, and they'll be wanting to take advantage of net metering and DC coupled batteries, I think, through that process. So that's something I've put in my memory bank now through your painful experience.
Yeah.
Hopefully it hasn't been too bad with the customer.
Well, no, the customer's been fantastic, to be honest. And when we did work out the difference between the feed-in tariff that they would have generated over this period, because we've got to remember that this period is terrible for generation anyway, and they've generated, it was something like they would have got paid something like £4 something from if you just did solar generation. If you disregard the fact that it would need to be downrated as well, because they would be on estimated feed-in tariff as well, so it would have come down. But it was more, but then the actual benefit of them being able to shift their load was like £7 something. So it worked out financially better for them at this period, but it was a little bit of a wake up call for me, because I'm thinking, well, okay, that's a 15 kilowatt hour battery. What if it's a 30 odd kilowatt hour battery, and suddenly you've doubled that loss over that period? Now, different inverters will have potentially different losses, but still, it's going to be a couple of percent. And so, if you've got a 12 kilowatt inverter feeding a 40 kilowatt hour battery system that has a little, you've put the solar PV into it for the feed-in tariff, then suddenly, this is then a completely it's the same issue but on steroids, because you're now, instead of doing 15 kilowatt hours, you're doing 30, and so you're not making a 1 kilowatt hour loss, you're making a 2 kilowatt hour loss per day, and then that is over that's 14 kilowatt hours that you've lost. And suddenly, as these batteries get bigger to cope with air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, then this is maybe an unforeseen thing that is going to cause some headaches for people.
Yeah, I mean, you get it again with the colder temperatures when these batteries are in their preheaters turned on. It can be a customer that's bought in, 20 kilowatt hours of storage overnight, but they're only getting maybe 15, 16 out of it through the day. You see those kind of conversations. We had a customer ask us a question about that. I think it was with a Give Energy product. I want to say it wasn't one of the SIG kits, because they're quite resistant to the lower temperatures, where they were seeing a bigger drop off than they were expecting. And I certainly see it with our electric vehicles as well. I'm sure you do with yours, that you get that drop in performance. And it's the same again with that net metering. If you're actually importing that raw energy to your battery, but if it needs a certain amount of that just to function, that's gone, and it's not going back through the meter the other way, is it? So those figures can soon skew, but the benefit and the upside comes when the customer can make that 30 pence saving from the solar generation when it does start to wake up at the back end of February and March and stuff. So it's still a worthwhile upgrade, but I think it's important for us to be able to explain those things to customers so they know what to expect. I think if you give them sight of that and you say, oh, by the way, there is this issue with net metering in colder weather through winter when you've not got a lot of generation, it's certainly not something I would have ever thought to mention. So I'm really glad you've raised this as a topic. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, no, and the other thing is as well, these, I don't know if it was yourself, Mark, or someone else I was explaining this issue to, because I've kind of tried to bang the drum on this a little bit, because I was like, oh, Christ, like there's going to be this is going to be happening all over the country, I'm sure, is that as we put bigger and bigger inverters in, then when a lot of these inverters are going in for when everything is on. So you're putting like a 12 or a 10 or an 8 kilowatt inverter in, and that's covering when the hob's on, when the cooker's on, or when the air source is on. People want it to really handle the peak generation, but homes are sat at 500 watts base consumption. And so where's the efficiency level at that
It's
point?
lost, isn't it? It's gone right down.
It's gone. And so suddenly, when we are discharging, we may be charging up at 12 kilowatts, and it's kind of hitting that 97% efficiency. But when it's discharging at 500 watts, what are we actually hitting in terms of when that energy is coming back out? And so, I don't know if it was you, Mark, or someone I was speaking to about it, that then rang home, and I was like, Christ almighty, yeah, that's true as well. Like, the efficiency is going to be down a lot when they're just creeping, a bit like your car. When you're just creeping along, the efficiency of that system is going to be coming down as well. So that in itself may make that equation even worse as well. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of learning, I think, with the sizing of these batteries. It's maybe not just they want it to cover the air source and the oven and that, all these things that maybe happen maybe once a week. They can have that, but they have to be aware that there's going to be efficiency losses over that.
Yeah, it might be a case of splitting the inverters into more than just one inverter as well when they have got a bigger peak they're trying to cover off. There's an approach where you've got a smaller sized inverter to cover the kind of normal average consumption, and then a secondary one that's sort of sat there watching, waiting for that bigger peak demand. But then you've kind of got the division of the batteries between those two things. It gets really complicated,
and the cost,
doesn't it? And the cost to it. I think some of the premium kit are pretty good with the larger size inverters of not having too much loss when the consumption is lower. But I mean, if you look at the graphs, some of them do drop right off. You're getting like 60 odd % sometimes if they're not working in their sweet spot. It is a bigger loss than people maybe realise. And they're dead right as well. Most consumers' houses just tick over their 500 watts in the background. They're at work, come home at night, put the cooker on. That's when it's working hard and they're using a lot of energy. Is it really that much of a cumulative loss at that 500 watts, even if it is in a low efficiency rating? Because when it is working hard, that's when the bulk of all the energy is used anyway. So it's maybe not as extreme as we think it is. But this kind of stuff is really important, I think, for installers, certainly who wanting to educate their customers and deliver good stuff, to have that conversation before it happens, rather than trying to figure it out through it as you've been doing. And I think that's why podcasts like this can be really important, to get that message out there, because this is something that, like I said, I think is going to grow while people do make these upgrades over the next 5 years. And yeah, I'm really glad you've raised it, because it can be an uncomfortable conversation, can't it? I bet you maybe had a sleepless night or two over it when those calls first started coming through.
Well, to be honest, initially I didn't. I thought, it must just be the meter that's gone faulty. But then as you kind of run it round in your head and you explain it to more people, you think, actually, I wonder if there is something a bit more to this. And then you speak to the meter manufacturer and they went, yeah, we have calls every week about this. It's because of X, Y, and Z. And you're thinking, oh my God, right, this is not something I was aware of. I need to make sure that I'm, the full team is aware of this now, because if we're giving out advice and, to our customers and things, and it's not right, then, we need to be fixing that ASAP. But, this whole load shifting side of things, it's not, I wouldn't say new, it's not like it's just come out this week, but, when you're in the context of the feed-in tariff, which is like, 2008 or something? I can't remember when 2012 or something. It was what seemed like now a really long time ago. Load shifting is quite new, and is one of those challenges, like we said right at the start of the podcast, that was never necessarily foreseen in the feed-in tariff rules. And so there's no way, if you want it DC coupled, there's no way to get around the net meter. You have to have that to retain your feed-in tariff. So this is then going to be one of those uncomfortable issues that you have maybe during the winter when you are, really rinsing that grid charging side of things. But you may be sacrificing that if you do want it DC coupled. And so the other alternative is you get another DNO application and you do it in an AC coupled system, so that it doesn't have that effect. But then you have then you still have the losses when you're solar charging, but at least you're not losing out on the money. So there's just another element for us now in Oval to think about when we are advising this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'd always assumed that the losses through the conversions from AC to DC would make that less efficient. It definitely does in terms of the way the energy's been used, but maybe it's not as big a gap as I thought it was because of that loss in the transfer while you're charging and discharging. So it's a really interesting one to delve into. It gets you thinking, doesn't it? And I don't know what the actual best setup might be now. It sounds like an interesting experiment to put together of an AC coupled alongside a DC one somewhere. We could maybe do that at a one-to-one training. And I would say to yourself, if you're ever bored enough to write an article, then a LinkedIn article around this topic would be a real flyer of a thing to cover. So I won't pinch your idea. I'll give you a few weeks to get one out first.
The clock is ticking.
But otherwise, that is a good one to get out there in some short form content as well, because that's a really interesting thing that I think a lot of installers, I certainly hadn't. Maybe other installers are smarter than you and me, and they've had this nailed down and figured out. But I don't think they will have, to be fair. And it's one of those things that we're going to need to know more about. It's maybe not been that much of an issue over the last 10 years, but I think it is going to be an issue going forward with people upgrading their fit systems.
Yeah.
And I still think it makes sense because of the clipping, as you said. That was another great point, because I'd never thought of that either, that if you're trying to remove elements of clipping with an AC coupled battery system, you can't do that. It's already been lost at the source inverter. With your DC style one, you very much can. So if you've got a larger fit system that you're opening that bottleneck of that you had before, then you want to avoid that clipping, don't you? So it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. As solar PV systems get bigger and battery systems get bigger, then unless you're really happy with clipping, and you take that into your calculations over, of what you want to achieve by getting a big system, then an AC coupled system is okay. But to really try and get the maximum out of your system, it almost needs to be DC coupled so that you can have that dual element of being able to charge the batteries from the DC whilst also discharging the inverter using the solar power and put it into the house or the car or the heat pump or the grid. And so having it DC coupled can unlock, maybe a 20% extra generation, because otherwise you'd have lost maybe that 20% of energy. So it can be a really meaningful amount. And certainly for people that have big battery systems and that are big energy users, they've obviously got that solar PV system to really impact on their home or their businesses' energy issues. And it's not necessarily the right thing just to size the solar PV system for the building's consumption. It's kind of like, well, but how does the building use that energy? And being able to use that energy at the point of generation is always going to be the best way. But if you do have those periods where, there might be a night shift in a business, or there might be, like in my house, it's quiet through the day, but then it's absolute carnage on a night. I want to make sure that I've been able to maximise that solar generation. And so my battery being able to discharge to the grid and earn some export payments, but whilst also charging up is absolutely key. And it's something that a DC coupled system is the only way to do it.
Yeah, and with your fit system as well, if it's doing it at that peak generation time and you're capturing that extra energy that you would have lost, ultimately that's going to run back through that meter and fire it round in the right way for your 70 pence to go, isn't it? So
exactly.
Any kind of marginal loss you might get through those winter months has got to be outweighed through that clipping benefit. So that's two things that you've raised there that I would not have even considered. My concern with it has always been around the kind of metering, getting that right, especially having messed it up in trying to get it right and practicing at my training centre.
I think we've all done that.
Yeah, that was and then dealing with the fit owners, I just think that's a faff and a hassle, and didn't really want to get involved with it, if I'm being honest. So I would always encourage consumers just to go AC coupled because it made life easier. It's a lazy answer, but that's the truth of my thinking with it.
Yeah, but it's also the answer that does keep you the most kind of insulated from those problems. And obviously the AC coupled side of things does bring in the issue of the G99 as well. And so suddenly if property would love to have an AC coupled system, but then is kind of forced down the route of a DC coupled because they are struggling to get the approval, then you may be forced into a corner of having to do something like this, unless the customer just scraps the whole idea, which some customers would do, but others wouldn't do. I think people need to know this sort of stuff, and crucially need to learn this sort of stuff through experiences like what I've just had. And there'll be other people that will bring other stuff, and I'll be like, bloody hell, I'm glad that didn't happen to me. But it's just this time I'm sat on the side of the fence where it did happen to us. But yeah, that's why conversation around it, open conversation around it, is the only way that we can all try and insulate ourselves from these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for sharing that so openly. I think that's one of the good things you do really well on this podcast, better than me for sure, bringing these kind of topics and speaking openly. We've still not had any of my customers be brave enough to come and sit next to me, but we've had one of yours. So
it's because I'll give them a real grilling to learn all your secrets.
That's it. Do me over. But yeah, if Steve is watching this one, there is a seat here if you ever fancy coming in and sitting alongside us. It'd be good to hear one of my customers go on the podcast. But is there anything else you want to cover on that topic?
No, I think that's it. But if anyone has got any questions about any of that, then I would love to learn more about it. So yeah, do put them in the comments and things. It's kind of one of them hot topics, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and this has been a real treat for me today because we've had Sarah in earlier on having a chat about solar panels, which was really interesting. And I've taken two things away from talking to Sammy, and that's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast. And I hope you enjoy listening to them with us. If you do, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the alerts for when these episodes drop. And if you're interested, you can get a week ahead over on Spotify. There's a very small charge that we use to kind of fund what we do out in industry. We're going to the trade shows and whatnot. We really appreciate it. It helps us massively. So thank you very much for watching. Get involved in the comments, and we'll see you on the next one. That was really interesting, mate. I was like, I would never have thought that would even be a thing.
Telling me.